relationships, other projects with the HBU, but that would not have happened without this HBU-RI collaboration. Socioeconomics, of course, play a role in setting a foundation for collaboration, and in the HBU-RI instance is seen as helping to bridge differences, economic differences, but also social differences, helping people to get to know one another and recognizing the similarities between different cultures and different types of people. And that leads into the fifth factor here, social networks and personal factors that play such an important role in any collaboration, but in these collaborations as well. And here are two quotes from our participating scientists. They say, "It is like dating. The important thing is that you get along. You've got to have the right chemistry. You've got to be buddies, close friends." And for those projects that were most successful, people spent a year, even up to 2 years, getting to know each other first, understanding each other's priorities and their work context, developing that relationship before going on to the formulation stage, where the research or project vision, goals, and tasks were established. Well, one of the things we found when we interviewed the scientists at HBUs, that they had 3 times the teaching load of their colleagues at RI universities. And they never brought this up, and the scientists at the RI universities had no clue this was going on. And also at the HBUs, they had no postdocs and few PhD students upon which to draw upon and to include and do the research with. So while in several projects, they thought they were being quite progressive, and the RI universities were given equal budget amounts to their colleagues at the HBUs, but that never equated to equitable partnerships. The dollar amounts, equal monetary amounts, did not translate into equal work possibilities. A second factor, of course, in formulating a project is leadership and organizational structure. So there's an issue of identifying the best leaders for a project versus fulfilling a quota. And there's a tendency in these types of collaborations to only think about the quota that you need to fulfill, especially as your funding agency will tell you must include faculty, colleagues at an HBU, and they don't spend, in some projects, they didn't spend the time up front finding the best person at the HBU to collaborate, just finding a person who was willing to say yes, they would collaborate. Of course, information and communications technology plays a role. We've heard a lot about that in the past day and a half, about the different capabilities, but there's also different preferences involved in these collaborations. And those preferences emerge from disciplinary preferences and also individual and cultural preferences. And people from different contexts will use the technologies and want to use them differently. Now, in addressing the different capability issue, we found that improved when the RI universities participated in HBU politics. So in one project, it was getting the internet access to the biology department lab was not an issue of money. They had the money for 3 years, the department had the money for 3 years, and had been requesting the internet connection for 3 years. And the administration always had some reason why it couldn't happen. But when the RI university professors came on campus and strategized with the local HBU faculty and went to the HBU administration, praising their faculty and talking up the project, how much it would contribute and how much it would put the HBU in the limelight, then the internet connections magically appeared exactly on time needed for the project. There are intellectual property and other issues that are best to discuss and iron out early on, and Paul spoke about that and has done a lot of research on that. We saw that there was a tendency for the strongest partner to claim intellectual property. People felt that there was very little they could do to combat this. And here on the slide, there's a quote from an HBU scientist that says, "They just don't know what it's like here." Moving along, next stage, sustainment stage, where there's a lot of challenges that emerge here and corrections that need to be done. What we saw in these projects is that goals tended to evolve apart. And the RI scientists rationalize this, explain this, saying they're not tuned into our research focus. We've kept on telling them for the past 2 years what our research focus is, but they just haven't gotten it yet. Where the HBU faculty, in this case, said that the RI faculty were taking over their research jobs, making their contributions redundant. And here's a quote by an HBU scientist. "They decide they can do our part faster, so they do it without giving us a chance." Communication in some projects at this stage was described as infrequent and irregular. And that led to the instance where project problems were only discovered in public forums, and everybody was unhappy about this. In other projects where multiple communication mechanisms were employed, email, phone calls, face-to-face visits, hooking up at research meetings and conferences, that seemed to work best. A third factor is learning, and this is often a fundamental component of collaborations, especially interdisciplinary collaboration and collaborations across these different types of institutions. But we don't often include learning as an activity in our project schedules. And learning requires time and requires trust. And that's things that impact the collaboration. The conclusion stage, of course, dissemination of results is a major issue here. What, when, where, and who. And Blaise Cronin has written a wonderful book, Hand of Science, summarizing a lot of research in this area. There's the issue of time. Who has time to write up the paper? Well, it's usually not the HBU faculty. And who gets the credit? Who gets to be first author? Who gets to be fifth author? Who gets to be last author? And it differs across institutions and disciplines as to what is important. Evaluation of success, as mentioned earlier, is also important, and it's something that impacts and occurs in the conclusion stage. And there's the question, do we need new additional measures for these types of collaborations? So in one project, there was knowledge transfer to students' family members. Students, after going home over a big holiday break, came back and they were so excited because they had shown grandma, her great uncle, her nieces and nephews, her aunts and uncles, what she was doing on the internet, the science she was doing on the internet. And everybody got excited and were committed to getting internet access to their homes and exploring this brave new world. And those type of measures, I think, can be important if we can figure out how to capture and justify them. Now, in some projects, there were real negative perceptions of the HBU partners at this stage. The RI scientists said, well, they do lower caliber and lower quantity of research. They're a poor representation of the research to the outside world. However, in some cases, there were positive perceptions, and it seemed when differences were accounted for, either in the formulation stage or in the statement stage, that led to positive perceptions. And so this is my final slide, suggesting we consider resource alignment for these types of collaborations, looking at infrastructure capability and services. The HBU departments didn't have purchasing support. So the RI scientists, for example, couldn't figure out why it took the HBU scientists 6 months to get a piece of equipment in, where they just went to a research assistant and told the research assistant what they needed. The system came back with lots of different options and different vendors. They selected one, and it was done. Where at the HBU universities, it was the scientists themselves who had to do all of that. Resource alignment concerned human resources, providing the students, the postdocs as needed, looking at time available and time schedules, existing knowledge and the conditions needed for learning, and individual and disciplinary preferences. So we need to consider, or we like to suggest you should consider an appropriate, not necessarily equal allocation and appreciation of resources, and that the recognition of differences and planning for alignment of these differences we found to be linked to success in the HBU-RI collaborations. Okay, thank you very much.
You can take a question or two. Yeah.
I have a question then about the process of implementing the collaboration. You said it's foundation, formulation, sustainment, and conclusion. I do believe that the four of them are very important for the success of the project. But what do you think is the most critical stage that if we fail, we will not be able to continue?
That's a good question. There's certainly all important. For the foundation, you know, scientists may not even consider collaboration if the foundation isn't there to support it. Now, there are always those who will go on in spite of a negative foundation. And formulation is important, so everybody buys in, a plan is developed and can go forward. But in sustainment, there is a chance to go back and look at those plans and goals and tasks and reformulate them to make them work. So they're all critical. And of course, you want a successful conclusion, so there'll be continuing collaborations in the future. So, gosh.
Is he back there?
I have some about 10 years experience in how to increase the productivity of the group to design something, plan something. And I combine different kind of people and to try to let them collaborate and to work in an effective way. And I have done different approaches, but I couldn't reach to a certain kind of real understanding, and human beings are too interested or too complex or too attractive to something in an unexpected way. And so are there some basic approaches or basic sciences how to describe such kind of very dynamic feature of the group and how to increase the productivity of the group? I want to know the main thing is I want to know how to increase the productivity of the group, and I couldn't find a suitable method. It is real case by case, and so I want to get suggestion.
Well, so I have a paper that this may be of some interest to you, but I think that is what we're all searching for. Those of us who do research on collaboration, what are the best ways of helping the group be productive? And there are a number of different answers with respect to that. There's issues of how to manage affective and cognitive trust, for example, and some different techniques that I have seen and others have seen to look at that. So we have research on different aspects of collaboration, and hopefully on an ongoing basis we'll do more synthesis and pulling that together, and work that Gary and his group have done, and others here will lead to that. And somebody mentioned that earlier today that there's no silver bullet, and we certainly don't have a silver bullet yet, and we probably won't, but the literature, we've now done some research where it can suggest various approaches that, given certain factors, given certain contexts, seem to work better than others.
There's actually quite a large literature in social and organizational psychology on exactly this problem, and the no silver bullet comment is a very important one because, you know, the answer is, well, it depends.
Yeah.
You know, who is the group? What are they doing? What are the constraints they're operating under and so on? So the answer is complicated, but there are answers out there in the literature, and I can give you some guidance if you like.
And you know, the effect of ICT.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's another factor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, still, I'm a little bit at the phase of just observing what is happening.
Yeah, I spent 5 years working with a group of chemists and chemical engineers, working with them and their use of ICT to help them form collaborations within a large research center, and that was very interesting work.
Okay, I think we need to move on to the next talk. Paul Euler from the National Academies in the U.S. is going to talk about the Global Information Commons.
Thanks, Gary. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm going to follow up on some of the earlier sessions this morning and step back a little bit with regard to the topic we're discussing here on collaboration, and talk about some what I would call first principle policy rationale and conditions for promoting greater cooperation internationally on digital networks. And so I'm going to be discussing more about that kind of the passive conditions rather than the actual conditions for specific collaborations, but more the policy background for promoting that kind of activity. So I think it's axiomatic that the rate of change in technological systems outpaces the ability or the capacity to adapt and rationally manage the new technologies in human systems, much less to exploit them for maximum benefit, whether social or economic. And this is particularly true of transformational technologies that displace the antecedent technologies and the associated organizational paradigms. And in such cases, not only do human systems need to adopt or adapt new management approaches that are necessitated by the technological advances, but they also must overcome the substantial resistance to change by the entrenched interests whose business model is being superseded by the new technology. And so I think obviously such an upheaval is currently taking place with in the context of global digital networks, which is a marriage of digital information technologies and global telecommunications. This table shows some of the differences. I'd like to focus on a few of the key ones. In particular, the marginal cost of instantaneous and global dissemination of information to near zero, which makes the speed, both the qualitative and quantitative ability to interact vastly greater than previously, and facilitating entirely new forms of distributed research, collaboration, and information production activities, and in particular enabling global participation, which is especially important in the context of bringing the developing countries into the global science system. So there are many models now of both distributed collaborative research and information production and dissemination on the internet. Probably the best known and longest lived one that we've had the most experience with is the open source software movement, which was initiated in academia, but which has been largely involved, has had primarily involvement with by commercial or industry Distributed grid computing, of course, is a new model, e-science. There are some examples such as SETI at home is probably the oldest. Many others are now coming online. Another new model of distributed collaborative activities are community-based open peer review. A very interesting example of that is the Journal of Atmospheric Chemistry and Physics, which does both pre-publication and post-publication review process. And of course, there are a lot of collaborative research websites, blogs, portals, knowledge environments. There are some examples given here that basically involve distributed, open, volunteer participation by people who don't even know each other, collaborating in developing new information remotely and without pay. There are, of course, also new forms of open dissemination online, which also, in many cases, include the actual production of that information. So in the data arena, there are open data centers and archives. Examples that are some that are well known are GenBank or the Protein Data Bank, where scientists send in their data for public domain dissemination. The Chinese Meteorological Agency is a good example of a government agency that provides its data openly online. Space science data centers have also been providing data for a long time, particularly from spacecraft as opposed to ground-based. Other forms of data collaborations involve open data, federated open data networks. The oldest example of that is the World Data Center System, which initiated in 1957, but obviously has become much more integrated through as a result of the internet. The World Data Centers focus on primarily environmental data. Global Biodiversity Information Facility is another example. The last one I have listed here, SEON, is a South African environmental observation network, which is now being organized and which operates on the same kinds of principles of open, non-proprietary types of access. Virtual observatories, either in astronomy or earth science, are kind of a hybrid version of these data networks, where with enhanced user capabilities for searching and viewing. Moving on to the literature, obviously a well-known phenomenon is open access journals. There are now over 1,600 such scholarly journals listed, registered on the Lund University website. Many of these are in the developing world. Cielo is a notable example in Latin America, which has over 300 open access journals through its portal. Byline International was discussed yesterday here, and many others. This is clearly a growing phenomenon in scientific publishing. Open institutional repositories are another way of promoting access on an open basis, either to the institution, to the literature or output, digital output of an institution. Institution scholarly works. One example given here is the Indian Institute for Science, but there are more than 400 registered globally on the Southampton University registry. But there are many thousands more that aren't registered, both in universities and especially in nonprofit organizations and government agencies, in international and intergovernmental organizations, and even in commercial some other disciplines. Free university curricula online are another growing phenomenon. Only a few universities have done this. MIT was the first and perhaps best known. It gets millions of hits a year. It's been wildly successful, and I hope that this is the kind of thing that will take off in other institutions of higher education. I understand in Japan there's already 6 of these, which is very encouraging. And then more broadly, there are now discipline-based commons. There's conservation commons and geocommons, archaeocommons, which are really incipient kinds of integrating frameworks for all the kinds of digital information products within a certain discipline that integrate the inputs and outputs of that discipline in one system with open access conditions. I just briefly like to talk about both the governmental and the academic rationale for placing information openly online or in the public domain, in the case of government information in particular. I have four rationales here. Legal, in terms of the government needing no legal intellectual property incentives for creating the information, since they're publicly funded, and they're producing that information on behalf of the public as a public good. There are ethical considerations where the public, since the public has already paid for the production of the information, and burden of additional access fees falls especially hard on those individuals least able to pay. And this is especially important in international, for international public goods, where developing countries can benefit much more from open access than because they have the least capability to pay the fees for subscriptions. There are political reasons, transparency in governance, and democratic values, and especially socioeconomic, and there are numerous economic and social, what economists would call positive externalities for placing information freely online, particularly through network effects that can be realized on an exponential basis, and that have both economic and social benefits. Turning to academia, the motivations of public interest research for academic and not-for-profit scientists generally are not market-driven, but primarily pursued in the public interest, and therefore open access types of regimes for academia are particularly supportive of the goals and values of academics to get their knowledge out and used. And the values and goals of public science are best served by the maximum availability and distribution of public research at the lowest possible cost, with the fewest restrictions on use, and the promotion of the reuse and integration of the results in new research. There are many benefits from open access to publicly funded scientific data and information online. With regard to developing countries in particular, as I've noted, promotes capacity building, facilitates transfer of information, transfer of know-how, promotes interdisciplinary, intersectoral, interinstitutional, and international research, and generally helps to maximize the research potential of new digital technologies and networks, thereby providing greater returns from the public investment in research. There are nonetheless many legitimate countervailing values and pressures, economic, legal, normative. Clearly, not everything can or should be placed openly online, and there are many countervailing policies and conditions. I'm not going to go through those, but there is certainly a balance that needs to be struck. Basically, what's needed is a shift from the presumption that information that is created in the public sector is closed unless there's a reason to put it openly online, to a shift to the default rule of openness, which requires a legitimate reason not to put it online openly. And there are a number of conditions here, legal and economic and institutional, that I provided. There are many others that I didn't even touch on, which are social, organizational, management, technical, etc. And can't really get into that. However, I just leave you with some background articles and reports that do discuss those issues in much greater detail. And all the Academy reports are available online freely through that website, and all my articles are online as well. So I welcome any comments, any questions.
Let me just make a comment. There was a very interesting session this morning that the two Pauls chaired. Yeah.
Several of early comments by earlier panelists were much more negative about the transformative quality of these technologies. You began your presentation with what I thought was a wildly enthusiastic picture of and in some ways, I would say inaccurate descriptions, certainly of print technology and so forth. But I'm very much in favor of the program you've described here. I see that it's completely unnecessary to make those kinds of wildly transformative claims in terms of supporting of the program. So I'm interested in strategically why you would, whether you think I'm wrong and you think it is important to make those claims in order to push the program. So
well, I certainly do believe, and obviously I didn't get into the details of what those differences are and why I think I think it's an entire paradigm shift to go from the print distribution model or even creation model to the global online network model. And perhaps we could talk about that offline. but I think there are a number of factors that make it not only quantitatively leap, but qualitatively as well. And there are, whether it's economic or social or scientific in terms of the research potential. And I think it's being borne out by all the new activities that are happening that was clearly just impossible to do under the print paradigm, and with some of which I noted as examples.
I guess it's certainly, I agree with you about the potential for the transformative quality, but precisely the reason why you need to do the work that you're talking about today is that if you don't do the work you're talking about today, that potential will be gone. So that it presented as already accomplished.
Well, okay, that may have been somewhat of an overstatement, and I didn't mean to say that, and I do agree, but it's consistent with the fact that I think that if in such a large paradigm shift, as I initially stated, the human systems take a lot longer to catch up with the technology, and we're still way catching up with the potential of the internet.
One more comment?
Can I add that the internet is the result of exactly this collaborative work and exactly the understanding and the vision that it was this collaborative work that if it could be done, it would give us leaps. And so that was previous, that was some of what we talked about in my session, and that in fact has borne out. And so we have a very significant achievement that isn't acknowledged at that. In fact, there are people at WASIS saying the internet came out of the private sector and not having no understanding of this. But in fact, we look at what we have now. We have a total new new situation, and this would have been, and it was predicted that this was in fact, it grew out of the scientists, interdisciplinary groups realizing they wanted and needed this interdisciplinary collaboration. So maybe putting it in that perspective would be helpful.
That's true. I completely agree with that. And actually, let me just make one final comment, and that is that the internet itself is probably the most effective research tool we have. And this gets back to what Johan was saying, that the funders or the policy people in your country don't recognize that fact of it, that aspect of it. And I think it should be much more described and promoted as a tremendous research tool that needs to be exploited for public and private advance.
Today, and I promise I'll be short. And I'm Xu Fanzhen from Taiwan, and my co-author is Xinyi Huang, is sitting in the second row chair. So she will hold the responsibility to answer all your questions afterwards. Our research is different from what the other panelists discussed. We are more focused on the research team collaboration in Taiwan, and we are eager to figure out that what the CMC and some of the network structure of the academia, how that cooperates, how the mechanism integrate and to increase, enhance productivity. And that's our major concern of the research. So this research, we conducted this research in the early of this year, and however, we look at what the use of the CTC, CMC, use of the email, how that related to academic productivity. And we borrowed a lot of literature from the CMC studies and also from the social network literature. And primary research suggests that the use of the email and internet technology facilitate information and knowledge exchange, increase scientific cooperation, and thus enhance academic productivity. And the email and the related technology have all overcome interaction barriers that geographic separation creates. And particularly in the international cooperations, email use efficiently reduce the cost, time zone, and physical barriers. Very well known that the email has allowed special dispersed scholarly kindred scholars to communicate and cooperate. So as scholars and scholarly network exchange information, collaborate, and socialize, computer networks become social networks. And that's this bunch of literature that address our first concern of the research question. We want to explore the effects of the CMC usage on the network structure and cooperation. While related to literature review of high consensus on the association of the email use and collaborative structure in scholarly network, there has been debate on the relative advantage of dense network and versus network with many structural hosts. And basically from Donwaker and Burt argue that network with many structural hosts provide greater access to new information because each of the members has unique information, and the individual providing the bridge across these hosts is particularly well positioned to gain from this diversity of information. Nevertheless, some argue that the dense network is better, as it provides cohesion, trust, consensus in the face of uncertainty and facilitate knowledge transfer. So the other, like the density versus structural argument, there's also debate on the strong tie versus weak tie. And some scholars argue that the weak tie are more important for information exchange and to bridge the distinct social worlds and information spaces. Some suggest that although weak ties are helpful for information search for simple knowledge, it is strong ties that facilitate the information search for complex knowledge. And strong ties are the key channels for accessing the scientific information. And Uzi found that the current linear relation that firms were most successful if they had a mix of one or few strong ties and many weak ties. And he argued that important information flow across strong ties, yet never with too many strong ties become inbreed. And the same result was found in John Walsh's studies. He, based on the survey of scientists in 4 fields, John Walsh found that the cooperation with some strong ties and with strong structure hosts provide best efficient of access to new information and the ability to transfer the information effectively. So let's come up with, from literature, we come up with 2 best research questions. Whether the body of dense network and strong time enhance information exchange and increase productivity, or it is structural hosts and weak ties that bridge the network and enrich the performance. In addition, under what kinds of network structure and ties can the routine, professional, and private information be exchanged in the cooperation team? This is based on our research framework. We basically hypothesized that we want to look at how the CMC usage of that medium change the network structure, and then enhance the collaboration productivity. And we also want to look at what different kinds of network structure affect different information exchange, and also look at how it has the impact on the personal performance of academia. So let's come to the method part. We selected, basically this is a case study, and we select the IPv6 Research Cooperation Team. And this team is a government-led technical steering committees that aims at building up new generation internet protocol infrastructures. And this team was chosen mainly because although these major members are also university scholars or scholars from research institutes, however, these kind of teams are more test-oriented and relatively more long-term duration, and also have much more pressure to have product pressures. And well, since we have done prior research on the general scholar in Taiwan, and we want to know that if we choose this kind of more text-oriented research team, and then we want to see how these teams, how that CMC use and the network structure affect their productivity compared to our research result and to the prior studies as our hidden goal here. And this research, research we conduct in April and May, and we use the weight-based name-generated network survey to the 42 IPv6 project efforts in 15 different institutions, and a total of 24 valid response are collected. Most of them are scholars from the university. And we also use a citation analysis and the UCINet software to describe the co-author publication network among IPv6 team members. Since most of the respondents come from the university, we finally use the co-author publication as the major productivity measurements for this research. Since we have a very small number of respondents, instead of giving you the statistic figures, I will summarize some of our exploring results. So the first question we asked is the relation of CMC and the collaboration networks. And in this research, we observed that the use of email to facilitate the communication among team members, it enhances weak ties, decrease network constraint, and it has a positive effect on publication productivity. The use of CMC does not increase heterogeneous collaboration across institutions. Members in each subject teams are generally from the same university or one research institute. For our research concern on the social network and information exchange, we found that strong ties show significant effects on all kinds of information exchange within the network. Institutional homogeneity is important for sharing and discussion his or her own ongoing papers with other project members. Participants with better opportunities is more willing to share his or her personal life information. So we are seeing a lot of strong tie effect on the information exchange. And finally, come to the cooperation productivity, the effect of the productivity. And we found that participants who exchange information heavily shows high academic productivities. And the social networks that can enhance active information exchange and thus increase academic productivity. So via the heavy information exchange, the social network did play a role on the academic productivity. So our results are more relatively supporting dense network and strong hypotheses on collaboration productivity. And this is some co-author network figures that is drawn by the UCLA. And this basically says that as you can see, that most of the co-author networks happen in the area 1A and B, and the other small group are more like the clique in the whole network structures. And the figure basically say that pattern of the co-author publication is mostly bound by the same institution. And scholars, we found the scholars who in the bridge positions would have better opportunity of acquiring co-author resource and getting better productivity. However, we do see the strong tie and homogeneous institution bond of the academic performance. Now, come to the discussion part. The result of the email usage and the CMC usage is pretty similar as the previous study that we had done, that it did show that it enhanced the scientific productivity. However, we found that the effects now via the change of network structure, which is very different or a little different from the US literature that suggests, and we kind of think about that maybe in our academia manual, that in our structure, that the use of the CMC might be viewed as a communication channel, like instrumental media, not as more supplemental goal of the user of the CMC, more like the supplemental of the existing social relationship. And that, in other words, that means the computer networks has not been yet social network. I think at least from this phase of the study, we do find the CMC, the effect of CMC, but not really the change of the network structure. Second, it is strong network relation rather than weak ties have positive impact on information exchange and thus enhance academic productivity. And the network reveals that our networks reveal that many strong ties and a few weak ties can. And we would like to ask, is this a unique academia model in Taiwan? Is it because that academia in Taiwan are more found in a small group and strong tie structure, or it is because the tight competition impacted the probability of heterogeneous cooperation among scholars? And we don't know yet, but we are more suspicious on this pattern. And moreover, we think that for the further studies, we can look at, in addition to the publication, the academic productivity and the co-author papers, we are more, we have to look at seriously about the implication of this kind of collaborative structure. How this kind of collaborative structure will in long term that affect the knowledge sharing and the innovation creating. I think these are two main things that we will debate on further studies. Okay, I will end my presentation here. Thank you.
Like to make a brief mention relevant to the generalizability of these results. There's a paper that just appeared in the most recent issue of Social Studies of Science by Sarah Kiesler and Jonathan Cummings, where they did an analysis of, I think, something over 60-some projects funded under an NSF initiative called Knowledge and Distributed Intelligence, or KDI, and these were in many different fields. And their measure was self-ratings of success, which you can quibble with that measure. But what they found was that collaborations that were within institutions had much higher success ratings than collaborations across institutions. So I think that element of what you're finding is a very similar kind of result. They found some evidence of success in cross-institutional things, but those were where they made a big investment on, I think, doing what you're saying, of creating strong ties by face-to-face meetings and strong management plans and so on. Paul?
Yeah, this is interesting. I think it would be interesting to do even larger studies of this kind that look internationally and have larger sample sizes to get more deep understanding. And following up on what you've already found, building on that.
Paul, and then...
Yeah, I have, there's a little bit of ambiguity. I'm not quite sure how you measuring strong ties. There are lots of statements about strong ties, promote information exchange. I don't know how you're measuring information exchange in a way which is independent of your measures of strong ties. And there are many, many causal statements here about one thing causing another. But my understanding was that this was a survey which was collected cross-section contemporaneous data. And so it's possible to interpret one thing as causing another, but I think I haven't read the paper, so I'm a little bit diffident about saying that you may have correlations and associations, but to interpret them as reflecting a one-way causation when in so many cases the causation could run the other way. For example, people who occupy bridge positions may be salient people, and they have a lot of publications. So it's the publications that establish their salience and their local influence, and they wind up being people who many people communicate with. Okay? So if you say, well, it's being in a bridge position that causes productivity, well, that's one possibility, but equally going the other way. And many of the statements that were made, it seemed to me, could be completely reversed on an a priori basis. So the question is how to design research that would enable one to establish some causal relationship, because so many of these contemporaneously measured things are ambiguous as to what their interpretation. This is not a specific criticism of this paper. It is a feature of many of the network analysis studies, which essentially collect data, which use network algorithms to establish links, but the links are inferred, that people communicate to the bridge person, and then the view is that somehow information passes through that person to the other. There's no evidence from the existence of the data unless you can actually observe that partner A got message from B that came through C. So you have to establish that. But if you just simply said that C received transactions with other people, you can't tell what's happening. So I'm interested in whether you've given some thought to. This is a hard question, but to what a research design would get at that kind of question.
Our main research interest is to see if the collaboration structure will change after using CMC. And when the structure transfer, will they frequently communicate each other more? Because we all know in the collaboration research, more communication may increase their productivity.
So
Because,
you're going to take observations at 2 points in time,
yeah.
before and after.
Actually, I asked them when they started, when they join in the project, how they communicate with each other, using what kind of channel and the frequency they communicate with each other. And we separate different kind of information, including private information, routine information such as confirmation, conference meeting, or such as simple information, and professional information, such as when you're discussing your essay, your essay to each other. So I separate different kind of information, and I ask them the publication of your last year's publication. Will you co-author with, or do you have publication from 2004 to 2005? And the publication is related to the IPv6 project. So I think I can clearly define the communication and the project has a causal effect. And as you asked how I measure strong ties, I think I use the name generating method to let them list their who will they communicate, or who will they co-work with the IPv6 members. And I let them describe the level of familiar, how familiar with those lists you mentioned. And I can distinguish if I has strong tie with that members, and I can distinguish the total proportion of strong tie in the network and the total proportion of the weak tie in the team.
It's frequency of communication.
How
familiar are you with the
how
person?
familiar with that people?
And that's an unambiguous question. If your supervisor frequently speaks with you and you are familiar with them, does that mean you have a strong tie with them? I don't quite. The valence, what it means can mean different things. It could mean, yes, this is a person with who I have frequent interaction with.
But it depends on the content of the message. Usually in social network analysis, they drop the messages. Like if you are the boss and you have your administrative assistant, you probably
Well,
send
that's what I'm asking is whether the message content
Exactly.
is used as a way of identifying the character, the tie, or whether it is just this is a person who I am very familiar with. I know them well. I hate them deeply. I don't trust them, but I am totally familiar with them. That's why the content analysis methods, which actually track what is being said, as well as the frequency with which it's being said, gives you another dimension, which you can scale what the character of that communication is. But it's a very intensive thing, and you have to monitor the email, so that's hard to do by a survey.
That's true. So actually, we have only several questions to ask: if how familiar with that people, and what kind of information you will exchange with that people, and so I think we cannot monitor their email for a few months. So we only ask them those kind of I think simple questions to clarify.
I think given that time, we should probably take the rest of the discussion offline.
Yeah.
Just like to thank everybody for their contributions and
It's okay. I have a question for you. I'll record it. Can you? No, I'll record it, but you have still 5 minutes. Yeah. I need this one.
I need to talk to you. I just conducted social network analysis. That might be some you try to do your best.
Thank you for very good answer.
Hey, Gary.
Pushin. I had a question.
I did just think
Yeah, sure.
Good. Is Derek got these meetings, or I know he was debating whether they come or not?
Well, no, I think you can use both of these things together. I think there's a certain amount of being able to look at the structure of communication contacts, and then try to go from another dimension. I talk a lot to Woody Powell about these things, and when people identify a person in a bridge position, I say, well, I wish you would go and would say to people in the group or in the consortium of firms, everybody seems to spend a lot of, do a lot of traffic with this. Do you? Why? Okay, what is the